So I'm Marla. I'm the owner of Velvet Looks LLC, and every month we have a advanced sexuality series where we talk about something new and different. So this week we have the poly panel, and I'm really excited about it. I personally study alternative sexual communities, and polyamory is one of them. And so I'm just excited to hear what these folks have to say. I know almost all of them. I'm new to a couple of folks, but that's okay. And I know these are all intelligent minds, and so I can't wait to hear them talk and give them my questions. With that said, I just, if everybody could introduce themselves really quickly. Yeah, start with you, Angelique.
My name is Angelique, and what do you want me to say?
Talk about just introduce yourself and your relation to polyamory.
Okay. So my name is Angelique. In some circles, my peeps call me Red, and I would say that I think there's a difference between being poly and doing poly, and so at any given time I probably would identify with doing poly behaviors, not necessarily poly as my core. There have been times in my life where that has been true, and I can talk more about that. I am a therapist, and in my private practice I mostly see alternative couples. I say alternative because it's not alternative to us, but the world likes to call us alternative, so that's what we use. That's pretty much it.
I'm Elisabeth Sheff, and I'm a researcher. I tend to research or intellectualize what frightens me, so I'm terrified of polyamory. And am not polyamorous, although I play one on TV. No, I'm not actually on TV. But I have studied it for the last 15 years and have written quite a bit about it from different angles, mostly gender and then families with children are the two areas I've focused on. So I've got some stuff on women, some stuff on men, and then a lot on parents and kids.
Folks, hello. Friends call me MJ. I am a fairly new Atlanta resident. I moved here from Houston. I am a writer and a healer, energy healer. And poly is pretty much my core. I got the symbol tattooed on me recently. My wife is still in Houston right now. Actually, I have a long distance relationship with her and a local girlfriend and a couple other things going on. And we make it work the best that we can.
I'm Dan Barber, and business owner for 30 years, part-time philosopher. I've got two girlfriends that we've been together for, one for a little over 2 years, one for over a year, and we got lots of experiences to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And the reason why I wanted to put this panel together is because, polyamory piques a lot of people's curiosity. Sort of engaging in it, trying to do it versus, be it. And I really wanted to, I sought out people with different experiences with polyamory, so I'm just delighted to hear all your responses for my questions. So, my first question is, have you read The Ethical Slut or Opening Up? Sort of, what did you think of it, if you have or if you haven't? Did you learn anything from it or not?
Well, I got an answer.
Go ahead.
So, have I read the books? No. But my primary girlfriend is friends with the author of The Ethical Slut, and her sister is really good friends with the author of the other book. So this conversation is in my face all the time, and I'm not complaining about it. So I'm learning from almost directly from the source. And what did I learn about? Oh, that's.
You shouldn't learn anything.
We'll get there.
Anybody else? Have anybody else read it? Or?
I've read The Ethical Slut, I haven't read Opening Up. And as far as the substance of the book, it didn't teach me a lot because I was already being in the life before I read it. It did teach me some terminology and things I wasn't aware of before. I'm pretty boring when it comes to alternative things. I don't have a lot of experience with triads and quads and B's and such. So it was enlightening for me in that way. I
Just
really appreciate it.
terminology, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read more of Opening Up than I have read Ethical Slut, and I'm not sure that I would say that I learned new things, maybe just different ways of phrasing things, but probably like some of the other panelists, kind of was living the life and then sought out words to kind of frame it. So there wasn't a lot of new things. That probably would have scared the shit out of me if I had read it first. So I'm kind of glad that I didn't.
There's a seat, one last seat up there if you don't want to stand.
Actually,
Yay!
thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm really glad you did.
Okay. Well, actually, so you have Polyamorists Next Door. So you want to tell us a little bit about your book and how it's different from The Ethical Slut or Opening Up?
Yes, okay, so both Ethical Slut and Polyamory are both kind of how-to manuals, saying this is you want to be honest, you want to use communication, not only honestly, but brave communicating in polyamory. Not always comfortable, not always easy, but requisite. If you're gonna make it, you really gotta do it. So, in the Polyamorists Next Door, I don't really talk about like how to do it or what makes it work from a personal standpoint. It's more how have other people done it, what are the advantages and disadvantages. It's more a report on the kind of findings of the research overall rather than an advocacy book that ends up saying, yes, everyone should be polyamorous or no, polyamory sucks. I don't really take an advocacy position. It's more like, this is what people have done with it and this is how it's affected them.
Okay. So, I have another question. Are you ever involved in any political issues regarding polyamory? And if you are, what are they? And or how do current laws sort of affect your relationships? I guess particularly maybe for you two who are in relationships.
Well, politically, I'm a libertarian. I ran for lieutenant governor in Georgia in 2010. So I'm an atheist in the Bible Belt. So it really never came up. I don't, they wanted to know. Really, the conversation was always, how are you going to spend our money better? And being libertarian is like, I'm not going to spend your money. But so my polyamory aligns with my libertarian philosophy. The freedom. To me, when I was 13, and the priest, I grew up Catholic. The priest asked me, "Do you want to be a Catholic?" And I said, "No." And he said, "That's okay." He said, "How does God love you?" And I said, I don't believe in God. So he said, "Well, I'll tell you what I believe." He said, "I believe that God loves you by giving you freedom, by giving you free will, by giving you all of your choices." That made sense. I mean, not that I've, changed my mind, but that's how I've kind of looked at love. As if I love something, I want them to be who they are. I don't want to change them and turn them into something else. I want them to. So that's my libertarian political philosophy. My moral code is about freedom, and so love and beauty and morality are the same for me. So that's how it plays out.
Okay. So, think you want to add to that?
I have considered the issue of polyamory in politics from the perspective of the debate surrounding the definition of marriage in the United States. following that issue very closely. You know, I guess we could say the majority of America believe that marriage should be defined between a man and a woman, a man and a woman. That doesn't work too well for me because it is very much within the realm of possibility that I could want to marry another woman. And so I've really considered the possibility of a strategic partnership between polyamorous folks and LGBTQ folks as far as challenging the definition of marriage in this country. I'm continuing to watch and see how things play out with that to decide if I want to really champion that cause at some point in the future.
So thinking about sort of combining what you're saying, polyamory and LGBT folks, queer folks, how do you, maybe you two can add to that, like politically, do you see this as like the same kind of battle, or, you know, is it one and the same? Is it different?
I do think that it is different, and yet there's some overlaps. So I do like the idea of partnering together. One of the things that I have seen and I've experienced is that when we are in alternative communities, we like to think that we're very unique, and then we have this way of keeping other people out, which is really sad to me. So I thought, hey, we're all alternative, so we're all going to help each other. But when I have found myself in certain communities, it seems like there's not an alliance with other communities. So I would love to see us bridge the gap a little bit more.
What kind of, or how do I put this? Can you talk more, or can anybody talk about sort of their long-term relationships in polyamory and how that's played out with maybe their short-term relationships?
It's a never-ending issue, really. As a married person, every connection in a bar is inevitably going to lead to where do I fit in comparison to your wife. There's a constant debate within the poly community about this issue of hierarchy and whether lovers should be forever relegated to secondary status or whether they should have the option or the opportunity to become equal in some sense. And what does that mean? How do you work your way into that? There's so much to consider along those lines. Actually, within the past month, my wife and I have discussed the possibility of dissolving our titles as husband and wife because of the fact that we both have pretty serious relationships with other people, and this hierarchy issue has become very paramount for us. It is very much it's a serious issue we have to tackle of how do we make them comfortable and how do we ease their fears about where do we go with this in the long term. How do I not think that eventually you're going to get rid of me because I'm not number one in your life? So for us, it may be the case that we just decide to stop using those terms, and I would treat all of my lovers as a lover, and your rank in my life doesn't really exist. It's all about how well do we fit together and how well do we operate as a unit, as a couple and as within the larger circle of my lovers and her lovers and friends and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So thinking about that, it seems like I have some friends who sort of, this is my primary partner and this is my secondary partner and my tertiary partner. How have you navigated that, if you have? I know you say you're in this place of where you're moving in the direction of evening everybody on the same playing field. But I guess I'm wondering how has that affected you essentially thinking about the primary, secondary, tertiary? Is it real? Is it valid? Should it be valid in sort of polyamorous lifestyles?
So I'll speak to that some. My first poly experience, I was the secondary. And they had secondaries and tertiaries and a whole network going on. And so I think that set the stage for me in terms of my indoctrination, if you will. Because when I got into that relationship, my first thought was, when I heard about this woman being poly, I was like, oh, that's gross. You know, I would never, ever do that. I remember saying that to my mother. I remember saying that to my girlfriend at the time. I remember saying I would never, ever do that. And every time I say I would never do something, I always end up doing it. So, you know, coming into that relationship as the secondary, I had a lot of the questions of, you know, where do I fit? Her primary was married, so they already had a sense of how they did that. Because they had history and experience, it was really helpful for me to then, we took a bus trip on Greyhound across country. And the whole way there and the whole way back, I just asked her questions. And she was so gracious to answer all of my questions. Like, you know, what happens if I cut off my arm and I need you in the middle of the night? And, you know, just those things. And that's what I needed to ask all those questions. So being the secondary was an interesting experience. And then fast forward where I had a primary, it made it easy that I had a primary person and then everybody else who came in were secondary. But when that primary relationship dissolved, it was really challenging to figure out, does the secondary person then fall into the primary spot? Do they, you know, and they sometimes want to, but what if you don't want them to? Or you want them to and they don't want to. Sometimes when there's energetic space, we tend to do those behaviors and fall into that place, and then we realize, wait a minute, that doesn't fit what I'm wanting in my primary spot. So for me, I started developing different language around, I belong to the kink and the BDSM communities as well, and so I have vanilla primaries and then I have lifestyle primaries, and that made sense to me to distinguish that, you know, this person fits over here as my primary and no one else fills that spot, and yet they're my secondary in terms of my vanilla relationships. So it's always changing depending upon who the people are and where you are in your life as well. I don't know, I think that's the gist of it, but it seems that when people come in, there's a sense of, I've been here longer, so I should be a primary, and what does that mean? And so I like having conversations about, you know, you fill this spot. For me, it is about both complementary but also supplementary ways of being in relationships. So generally, I don't tend to be in relationships with people who are very similar to each other. So that spot is for that person, and this spot is for that person.
Do you ever feel like having long-term relationships and short-term relationships, like how do you navigate having long-term and short-term relationships at the same time? Anybody?
Very carefully. It's work. I mean, I heard someone say once that, you know, when we're doing edgy relationships, there are more moving parts. And when you have more moving parts, then you have to have more everything. You know, more communication. If you use the metaphor of a machine, you have to have more lubrication. You have to have more connection. You have to have more blueprints. You have to have more of everything. And I think for whatever reason, we've been sold this bill that, you know, Disney says that if it's right, it will just fit and it will work, and it's not going to be work, and you don't have to communicate, and, you know, the birds will fly and the fireworks will go off and everything will be right, but that's not really how it is.
Can I, before we move on,
Yeah.
can I go back and answer the activism questions?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So, I like to stir things up intellectually, so I write a blog on Psychology Today, actually, about polyamory, and I just wrote how slippery is the slope between same-sex marriage and multiple partner relationships, and apparently it has made a few people's heads explode. The comments I'm getting back from that range from, oh my god, I never even thought of that, to, you are evil. You should not be talking about this. Personal attack. And I wasn't even sure Psychology Today was going to let me put it up, because it was kind of, you know, it didn't take a position, but it really kind of pushed the, what is it about monogamy that makes it essentially good for the culture? Why is this? And that's what actually what one of the commenters said. Monogamy is good for the culture. And I said, why? What makes monogamy good for the culture? And somehow asking why really pisses people off because you know, there's no why about it. It's just the way it is. You should not be asking these questions. You should not be talking about this. So, from the kind of micro level, I do the blogging and try to help people with their exploding brains. And from the macro level, one of the big things is when I talk to the press or whatever, people are always asking, how many polyamorists are there? And we really don't know. So there's this thing called the General Social Survey. It's kind of like the social attitudes census in a way. They do a a series of interviews with people all across the U.S. It's a representative sample of the United States, and they recently had a thing where scholars could submit a question. Usually it's thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to get them to use one of your questions on the General Social Survey if you're submitting it. And so they just had an open call for submissions, unfunded submissions. So me and some other researchers, we put together a module on non-monogamy and explained why we needed to know about it and, you know, the different kinds of non-monogamy we were looking at, and we just submitted that on the 15th. So hopefully, fingers crossed, they will use that module and we'll actually be able to answer how many polyamorous people there are. And even if they don't take the whole module, would at least be able to answer how many people are in consensually non-monogamous relationships versus non-consensually non-monogamous relationships.
That brings up a really, really great point. I think about myself and how I tried polyamory and I was like, oh no, this is not for me, because navigating one relationship is good enough. So thinking about navigating all those different relationships, I'm just kind of, how do you all navigate those relationships? And kind of to bounce off of what you were saying, when people say they're poly, and then say they're not, and then say they're poly, how would that even affect your survey? Maybe we can answer that one first. So how would that affect your survey or not? Because how people kind of bounce back and forth between.
Can I interject a question that's like that? How do you define poly? I mean, if you have a survey, how do you say, am I poly or not?
Before we get into that, y'all, we had some panelists coming, Honey and her husband,
Okay.
that came in late, so, and I want to scoot in some more chairs. See, we got one chair.